On the 19th of October, 1959, a Boeing 707 aircraft embarked on what was meant to be a routine test flight. The goal was simple: to demonstrate the aircraft's capabilities to Braniff International Airways in return for their potential purchase of the aircraft. The mood was hopeful, the weather was clear, and the crew consisted of experienced professionals. As the aircraft ascended into the pristine blue skies, the crew prepared to demonstrate the jet's capabilities and started pushing it to its limits. The pilot attempted a dangerous roll that exceeded the maximum bank restrictions, and suddenly, the plane lost control. The massive 707 began to hurtle towards the earth, with 3 of its 4 engines tearing away. Seconds ticked by as the ground loomed closer, and fear gripped the passengers. What began as an ambitious display of progress and innovation soon enough turned into a catastrophic event that shook the aviation industry to its core. What happened on that fateful day? How could a state-of-the-art jet, which was hailed as a technological marvel, suffer performance malfunction? This is the harrowing story of Braniff International Airways' Boeing 707 demonstration flight. The date was Monday, October 19, 1959. The location was Boeing Field in Seattle, Washington. It was a clear day, and the weather conditions were suitable for the demonstration flight. This flight was part of Boeing's effort to finalize a deal with Braniff International Airways. The goal was to train Braniff pilots on the aircraft they would soon operate, while also highlighting the jet's performance. At 144 feet and 6 inches long, with a wingspan of 130 feet and 10 inches, and powered by 4 Pratt & Whitney JT3C6 turbojet engines, the 707 was the jewel of Boeing's fleet and a symbol of modern commercial aviation. The aircraft had accumulated just 173 hours of flight time, which served as a testament to its newness. The scheduled flight time for this test run was approximately 4 hours and 15 minutes. Yet, nothing about what happened would follow the plan. A Federal Aviation Administration (FAA) representative, 3 Boeing employees, and 4 Braniff employees were on board that day. The individuals were highly skilled and experienced professionals who were chosen specifically for this critical flight. Leading the team was Russell H. Baum, was a 32-year-old Boeing test pilot with over 5,000 hours of flying experience across various aircraft. Joining him was Captain John Burke, who was a 49-year-old Braniff captain with an impressive 23,500 flight hours. Baum was instructing Burke, and while Burke was a veteran pilot, this was his first experience flying a Boeing 707. Another Braniff captain, Frank Stanley Jr., was also on board. Stanley had logged nearly 20,500 flight hours, which made him a seasoned aviator. In addition, Boeing flight engineer George Hagan was present to oversee technical operations. The passengers on board included William J. Alsop, who was a Boeing test pilot, Albert C. Krause was a Braniff flight engineer, William H. Hubner Jr., and Federal Aviation Administration Air Carrier Operations Inspector, and Fred Simic, a Braniff maintenance instructor. This highly experienced team was assembled to ensure the success of the flight. They were all fully aware of the potential risks involved in the demonstration, but never expected that this routine flight would soon spiral into disaster. The test flight took off from Boeing Field at 2:51 p.m. The plan was pretty straightforward: to climb to a cruising altitude of 12,000 feet while demonstrating the aircraft's maneuverability and familiarizing the Braniff captains with its handling. Shortly after takeoff, the aircraft leveled off at the designated altitude, which allowed the test pilot Baum to begin performing a series of maneuvers to showcase the 707's capabilities. Captain Burke of Braniff then performed several successful Dutch roll recoveries from the left-hand seat, with flaps retracted. Baum then reduced the aircraft's speed to 155 knots, lowered the flaps to 40 degrees, and instructed Captain Burke to carry out a series of recoveries from this new configuration. As part of the exercise, the crew practiced recoveries under different configurations. Baum demonstrated, Burke followed suit, and then positions rotated. The trouble began when Baum initiated a series of Dutch roll maneuvers. A Dutch roll is a complex oscillating motion where an aircraft yaws by swinging left and right and then rolls by, tilting side to side simultaneously. While it can occur naturally due to turbulence, it's a routine part of testing to demonstrate how an aircraft handles and recovers from such movements. In this demonstration, the Boeing 707 was in a clean configuration, meaning its flaps were fully retracted, and it was cruising at 12,000 feet. Baum started the Dutch roll by allowing the aircraft to bank slightly over 25 degrees, which was already pushing the manufacturer's recommended limit. A fellow test pilot on board cautioned Baum about banking too steeply during the Dutch roll maneuver, but Baum ignored the warning. Baum decided to push the aircraft further during the second Dutch roll maneuver. This time, he allowed the bank angle to exceed from 40 to 60 degrees, which was more than double the safe operating limit. The aircraft began oscillating violently, swinging left and right with increasing intensity. Captain Burke was tasked with recovering the aircraft and was unfamiliar with the 707's recovery methods. In an attempt to stabilize the jet, he overcorrected, causing it to roll past a 90-degree angle, nearly perpendicular to the ground. The plane then entered a downward spiral, teetering on the edge of control. Baum realized the severity of the situation and took back control of the plane by pulling it out of the spiral temporarily. For a brief moment, it appeared that the aircraft might regain stability. However, the relief was short-lived. The oscillations that were once halted began again with even greater intensity. The plane's movements became more exaggerated with each passing second. The combination of the overcorrection by Burke and Baum's decision to push the aircraft past its operational limits resulted in what would ultimately lead to a graveyard spiral. Despite all efforts to regain control, the aircraft continued to spiral downward in a terminal descent. In this dangerous maneuver, any chance of recovery was nearly impossible. The tremendous G-forces experienced during the erratic maneuvers had overwhelmed the plane's structural integrity and had left it crippled mid-air. Alarms in the cockpit began signaling a loss of thrust in 3 engines and a total loss of electrical power. Passengers in the cabin, peering out of the windows, saw a horrifying sight as flames erupted from the remaining attachment points. This left the crew in a state of shock as the aircraft was reduced to a single functioning engine. The sole remaining engine, Engine 3, was struggling to keep the plane aloft. To make matters worse, the jet fuel was also leaking dangerously from the ruptured tanks. The situation was deteriorating faster than anyone could anticipate. The crew was left with a terrifying reality that keeping the plane in the sky was no longer a question of skill. It was a matter of sheer survival. Panic gripped the passengers who were in the cabin when they realized how grave the situation was. Engineers, test pilots, and the Federal Aviation Administration inspector rapidly proceeded to the rear of the aircraft and took their crash positions to prepare for an emergency landing if the situation demanded it. Fear hung over the air, and there was little to be done except wait. With only one engine operational, the aircraft was barely controllable. The crew was fully aware of the precarious situation and knew that an immediate emergency landing was their only option to avoid disaster. Captain Baum, who had taken control of the situation, had initially aimed for a nearby airstrip in the hopes it could serve as a safe landing spot. However, as the seconds ticked by and the aircraft continued to lose altitude, it quickly became clear that they wouldn't make it. The airstrip, which was once within reach, now seemed too far away. Incapable of reaching the Payne Air Force Base at Everett or Airport at Arlington, he identified an open pasture near the North Fork Stillaguamish River, which is west of Oso, Washington, as their best chance for survival. Baum steered the plane toward the open field, focusing on his training and the hope that the smooth, soft ground would cushion their descent. The powerful twisting force from the only working engine made it incredibly hard to keep the plane's wings steady. The uneven pull was throwing the entire aircraft off balance, making it nearly impossible to control. In a last-ditch effort to stabilize the situation, Baum made the difficult decision to shut down the final engine. This left the plane without any power, turning it into a giant glider. This technique, called a dead stick approach, is a risky move that relies on the pilot's skill to guide the aircraft to a safe landing, using only gravity and airflow. For a brief moment, it seemed like the crippled jet might make it to the intended pasture. The plane was little more than 800 meters from the field when disaster struck. The plane clipped the tops of tall trees, sending it out of control. It slammed into the bank of the Stillaguamish. The scene was devastating. The forward part of the fuselage, which usually houses the cockpit and part of the passenger cabin, had been completely obliterated by the force of the impact and the intense flames. What was once a sleek and sturdy aircraft was now nothing more than twisted metal and ash, scattered over the crash site like a grim reminder of the violent event. Pieces of the wreckage were scattered across several acres. making the crash site look like a field of debris. The back section of the airplane, including the tail, broke off right behind the wings and ended up landing sideways in the middle of the river nearby. Despite the severe damage, the tail section of the airplane, which is known as the empennage, remained mostly in one piece, even though it was far from where the rest of the plane ended up, and thus only 4 passengers inside it were spared. The 4 of them crawled out of the wreckage, wading through the water unscathed, except for a few minor injuries. But tragically, the fire consumed the cockpit and killed the 4 crew members inside almost instantly. The 4 people killed in the plane crash were Baum, 32, Burke, George C. Hagen, 28, and Captain Frank Stanley. The Boeing 707 crash came to a devastating end on Anton and Ada Osler's farm, a couple who rushed toward the nearby river. They called the Snohomish County Sheriff's Department, who quickly responded and reached the scene of the crash. The first to arrive at the scene were a group of sailors with firefighting equipment who managed to control the fire and prevent it from spreading. The survivors were severely shaken and suffering from hypothermia and were taken by ambulance to Arlington General Hospital. The recovery crews began the grim task of retrieving the bodies of the deceased and salvaging parts of the aircraft for investigation. 3 were found in the charred cockpit, while the 4th was retrieved from the river. By nightfall, all 4 bodies had been recovered, and search teams scoured the area for the missing engines. Over the next week, all 3 engines were located, the first being the day after the crash. It was discovered in a wooded area approximately 1 mile northwest of the crash site. The second engine was located another half-mile farther in the same direction. A few days later, a helicopter pilot identified the 3rd engine within the same general vicinity. Examination of the engines revealed that all 3, along with significant portions of their pylons, had been torn from the aircraft's wings during the intense Dutch roll maneuver. The 4th engine somehow remained attached to the plane until it made its crash landing. Anton Osler claimed to have heard tremendous humbling sounds as the plane hit the ground. Following the accident, many smaller explosions were observed. A few trees were blazing in the dense forests, and debris was also strewn about. The Civil Aeronautics Board, CAB, received news of the crash immediately and did not delay in investigating the causes of this accident. The flight data recorder was recovered almost immediately. However, it hadn't been activated for the demonstration flight, which meant that the Civil Aeronautics Board had to rely heavily on testimonies from the 4 survivors of the accident throughout their investigation process. Their testimonies were vital sources of information to understand the series of events that led to the tragedy. Statements by eyewitnesses from the ground also played a pivotal role in piecing together the sequence of events. Based on a detailed review of all available evidence, the Civil Aeronautics Board then finalized and published its official aircraft accident report on Monday, June 20th, 1959, to pinpoint the circumstances under which the tragedy occurred. The investigation revealed that the violent Dutch roll maneuvers had subjected the aircraft to forces far beyond its structural limits. The oscillations caused immense stress on the wings, leading to the catastrophic failure of the engine pylons. Investigators noted that the Dutch rolls exceeded the recommended bank angles, which compounded the strain on the aircraft. However, they couldn't find any good reason for Captain Baum to start the final Dutch roll so forcefully, as there was no training benefit from doing the maneuvers at such a steep angle. Additionally, the inexperienced recovery by Captain Burke, while understandable given his unfamiliarity with the 707, also played a role in escalating the crisis. The rescue and investigation team included Snohomish County Coroner Ken Baker, Sheriff Bob Twitchell with a rescue unit, Al Williams and his civil defense team from Stanwood, Washington, State Patrol officers Sergeant J. Harvey and Lieutenant Webb Sloan, and a fire crew from the naval station at Jim Creek. The crash of Braniff's Boeing 707 test flight served as a sobering lesson for the aviation industry. It serves as a reminder of the fine line between demonstrating an aircraft's capabilities and pushing it beyond safe operating limits. Following this accident, the Boeing Airplane Company made adjustments to its flight training syllabus to highlight the importance of adhering to the maximum allowable rollbank angles during the Dutch roll maneuver. Furthermore, the timing of the Dutch roll demonstration was postponed to a later stage in the training program, ensuring that pilot trainees gained more flight experience before attempting this complex maneuver. This tragic flight underscored the thin line between showcasing innovation and pushing boundaries too far. It remains a cautionary tale about the dangers of underestimating the forces at play in aviation. Don't forget to like and subscribe. We'll see you in the next one.